Inside England's oldest family home, 850 years of history. Before we begin, take a moment to imagine a place where history has never paused, a house that has never been abandoned, never passed out of the hands of the same family, never reset by time. What you are about to hear is not the story of ruins or relics. It is the story of continuity, of survival, of belief carried quietly through centuries of upheaval. If you find yourself drawn to historic houses, to the lives lived behind ancient walls, and to the unseen human stories that shape nations, then stay with me. And if you enjoy journeys like this, into the past that still breathes in the present, I invite you to subscribe, to like, and to share this story with others who feel the same pull toward history that endures. Tucked into a secluded valley in southern England lies one of the most extraordinary family homes in the country. From a distance, it appears almost modest, partially concealed by rolling hills and ancient woodland. But beneath its red brick facade and layered stone walls is a story that stretches back more than 8.5 centuries. This is not just a house. It is a living record of England itself. Long before the house took shape, this valley was already sacred ground. At its heart stands a prehistoric stone circle, nearly 5,000 years old. These stones, weathered and unassuming, were placed here long before England existed as a nation. Their presence tells us that people have gathered, worshipped, and found meaning in this landscape for millennia. When later generations built their home nearby, they did not erase this past. They built around it. The family name itself is drawn from this terrain. The earliest recorded ancestor, known in the 12th century as Robert of the Stony Place, took his identity from the land. In medieval England, names were often descriptions rather than inheritances, and this one speaks to a deep and literal connection to place. From that moment on, the family became inseparable from this valley. The earliest structure on the site was a medieval hall constructed in the late 1100s. It was simple, defensive, and practical, built for a world where stability was never guaranteed. Attached to it was a private chapel, licensed in the mid-13th century. That chapel would come to define not just the family's spiritual life, but their fate. When England was torn apart by the Reformation in the 16th century, loyalty became dangerous. To remain Catholic was to invite suspicion, punishment, and financial ruin. Many families conformed. Others fled. This family did neither. They stayed, and they refused to abandon their faith. Mass continued to be celebrated in the chapel, even when it was forbidden by law. Priests were hidden. Services were conducted in secrecy. The house itself became a refuge during one of the most violent religious crackdowns in English history. This quiet resistance came at a cost. Heavy fines were imposed. Anti-Catholic taxes were enforced. At times, the family paid triple what their neighbors paid simply to remain where they were. Yet the house survived because it was never fashionable enough to be remade. While other estates were torn down and rebuilt as grand Palladian mansions, this one remained layered rather than replaced. Each generation added to it, adapted it, lived within it, but rarely erased what came before. As a result, the house today is not one building, but many, stitched together across centuries. Walking through it is like moving through time. Floors rise and fall unexpectedly. Rooms shift in scale and style. Medieval stone gives way to Georgian brick. Gothic revival details sit alongside remnants of earlier ages. The symmetry seen from the outside is an illusion, created later to impose order on a structure that grew organically. The chapel remains the spiritual heart of the house. Though remodeled in the Gothic revival style in the 18th century and refreshed again, after the Second World War, its purpose has never changed. Mass is still celebrated there weekly. Beneath the floor lies the family vault, now full, holding generations who lived, worshipped, and died within the same walls. The house also played a critical role in one of the most dramatic episodes of religious persecution in England. In the late 1500s, a Jesuit priest returned secretly to the country to support the underground Catholic community. He was sheltered here, hidden within the walls and roof spaces of the house. From this location, he operated a clandestine printing press, producing writings that challenged the religious authority of the state. Searches were conducted, soldiers scoured the house, yet the hiding places were so expertly constructed that nothing was found. It was only later, after betrayal elsewhere, that the truth emerged. By then, the damage had been done. Members of the family were imprisoned. Their loyalty was recorded, punished, and remembered. Portraits from this period still hang in the house. Faces stare out across centuries, their expressions restrained, formal, and resolute. These were not passive figures in history. They were participants, making choices that shaped their future and nearly ended it. As time passed, persecution eased. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the family was able to re-enter public life. One member played a role in the Catholic emancipation movement, helping to restore civil rights to Catholics across Britain. Titles were granted, political office was held, connections were rebuilt. The interior of the house reflects these shifts. Rooms once designed for defense and privacy were softened for comfort and hospitality. Windows were enlarged, not just for light, but to reduce punitive taxes levied per pane of glass. Stained glass rescued from earlier periods was reinstalled elsewhere, preserving fragments of the past in new contexts. The drawing room contains one of the most important visual records of the house, a painting from the late 17th century depicting the estate, its gardens, and its surroundings. Details within it reveal moments of regained freedom, including the reappearance of horses and coaches once forbidden to Catholics. The dining room tells another story, this one transatlantic. In the early 20th century, an American woman married into the family, bringing with her objects, heirlooms, and influences from the United States. Wallpaper produced in Paris in 1815 covers the walls, depicting an idealized vision of the French capital, painstakingly hand-blocked at a time when such decoration was among the most luxurious possessions imaginable. Glassware bearing American symbols, Federal period sconces, and personal objects from early American families sit comfortably within a medieval English house. They are reminders that history does not move in isolation. It travels, marries, and adapts. The library is perhaps the most remarkable room of all. Built into the hillside, it spans 2 levels and contains a barrel-vaulted ceiling restored in the 20th century. Its shelves hold a rare collection of ecclesiastical books, many smuggled into England during the Reformation. Alongside them are Anglican texts, preserved not out of agreement, but out of vigilance. The family always knew that survival required awareness as much as conviction. Within the same room is an archive of national importance. Among its treasures is a document bearing the seal of a medieval king granting rights to hunt and govern land in the early 14th century. Another item is one of only 4 surviving copies of a banned religious text printed secretly in the house. These are not museum replicas. They are originals, preserved through centuries of war, neglect, and change. The house itself nearly fell into disrepair after the Second World War. Requisitioned and repurposed, it lost much of its structure and care. When the family returned in the late 1970s, they faced a choice: retreat into privacy or open the doors. They chose the latter. The house was open to the public, not as a museum, but as a lived-in home. Visitors walk through rooms still used daily. Beds must be made before opening hours. Personal life and public history coexist, carefully balanced. The surrounding gardens reflect the same philosophy. Terraced into the hillside, they trace their origins back to the medieval period. Over time, pleasure gardens replaced kitchen plots, and later, generations restored structure where war had left only weeds. Hedges were grown from cuttings, borders replanted, views reopened. Today, the gardens are alive with seasonal color and sound. Children play nearby. Volunteers tend borders that once lay abandoned. The past is not frozen here, it is maintained. What makes this house extraordinary is not just its age, but its continuity. Generation after generation chose to stay, to adapt rather than abandon, to carry belief, memory, and responsibility forward. This is not a story of untouched perfection. It is a story of survival through compromise, patience, and care. Of a family who understood that history is not something inherited once, but something earned repeatedly. After 850 years, the house remains. Not because it resisted change, but because it accepted it, carefully and consciously, while refusing to forget where it began. What becomes clear as the story of this house continues is that endurance is not accidental. It is the result of thousands of small decisions made quietly, often without recognition, by people who understood that continuity requires sacrifice. As the centuries progressed, the house increasingly reflected the rhythms of everyday life rather than moments of grand historical drama. Children were born within its walls and grew up navigating corridors shaped by medieval masons and Georgian craftsmen alike. Generations learned to live with uneven floors, narrow staircases, and rooms that changed purpose as necessity demanded. What modern visitors might see as charming irregularities were once simply the reality of a house that grew rather than restarted. The solar, one of the earliest domestic spaces, offers a rare glimpse into how medieval family life unfolded. Elevated slightly above the Great Hall, it served as a private living area where the family could withdraw from servants and retain a measure of comfort and intimacy. Over time, its role transformed completely. By the 19th and 20th centuries, it had become a showcase for an extraordinary collection of furniture gathered by a later family member with a keen eye for art and craftsmanship. Among these pieces is a chair unlike any other. Once part of a Venetian gondola, it was removed from the water and transported across Europe, later mounted onto a custom-carved stand made by a London craftsman. It once sat improbably beside a bath in a city residence, before finally finding its place in this ancient English house. Nearby stands a bed that has baffled art historians for decades. Created around 1820, its origins remain uncertain. French, Italian, Scandinavian, even Russian influences have been suggested, but none confirmed. Carved in the shape of a shell, adorned with dolphins, mermaids, and shimmering mother-of-pearl inlay, it defies easy categorization. Its survival alone is remarkable. Its presence here, in a house already layered with history, adds yet another mystery to the narrative. These objects are not displayed as trophies. They are part of a living environment, absorbed into the daily reality of the house. This distinction matters. Unlike institutions where objects are preserved behind glass, here they exist within spaces that continue to evolve. The result is a house that feels inhabited rather than curated. The archive housed within the library reinforces this sense of lived history. Documents spanning hundreds of years are preserved not because they are valuable artifacts, but because they were once necessary records of survival. Charters granting rights, correspondence navigating political danger, and religious texts smuggled at great risk all remain intact. They tell a story not of abstraction, but of lived consequence. Each document represents a moment when the wrong choice could have meant the loss of land, freedom, or life itself. During periods of relative peace, the family's role shifted from quiet resistance to cautious participation. Members served in parliament, held positions at court, and forged alliances through marriage. Yet, even during these more stable times, the house retained a sense of inwardness. Unlike the grand showpieces of later aristocracy, it was never designed solely to impress. Its beauty lies in accumulation rather than spectacle. That same principle extended to the surrounding land. The estate was never reshaped into a single, dominant vision. Instead, fields, woods, and gardens evolved gradually. The terraced gardens, likely formalized in the 17th century, offered both utility and pleasure. South-facing walls created microclimates where delicate plants could thrive. Stone retained warmth. Paths guided movement without dictating it. The parkland beyond was shaped as much by restraint as by ambition. While neighboring estates cleared vast areas for sweeping views, here the valley remained partially enclosed, preserving its sense of seclusion. This decision, whether intentional or circumstantial, protected the character of the place. Even today, the house reveals itself slowly, only after winding through woodland and descending into the fold of the land. The 20th century posed new challenges. 2 world wars reshaped Britain socially and economically. Like many large houses, this one was requisitioned, its private life suspended in service of the national effort. Rooms were repurposed. Gardens were stripped back to provide food. Ornamentation gave way to necessity. By the time the family returned, much had been lost, not through neglect, but through survival. The restoration that followed was neither quick nor easy. Roofs leaked, stone crumbled. Interiors required careful repair rather than replacement. Resources were limited, and priorities had to be set. What mattered most was stabilizing the structure and ensuring the house could function as a home once more. Opening the house to the public was not a romantic decision. It was a practical one. The cost of maintaining such a complex structure could no longer be borne privately. Yet this shift fundamentally altered the relationship between the family and the house. Private life became partially visible. Boundaries had to be negotiated daily. Children grew up accustomed to visitors walking through spaces that were also part of their domestic routine. Bedrooms doubled as exhibition spaces. Furniture served both historical and practical purposes. The house became a shared responsibility, not just to ancestors, but to the wider public. Over time, this openness transformed the estate into something more than a private home. It became a place of education, recreation, and connection. Events brought new audiences. Gardens drew volunteers. Playgrounds welcomed families who might otherwise never step inside an ancient house. The estate ceased to be a relic and became a living part of the community. Yet despite these changes, the underlying philosophy remained consistent. The family did not see themselves as owners in the modern sense. They understood their role as temporary custodians within a much longer timeline. Decisions were made with an awareness that future generations would inherit not only the physical structure, but the consequences of those choices. This mindset explains why the house has never been frozen in a single era. Each generation left traces of itself while allowing earlier layers to remain visible. The result is a palimpsest of English history, where medieval devotion, early modern resistance, Georgian adaptation, and modern pragmatism coexist. What visitors often remark upon is not grandeur, but atmosphere. There is a sense that time moves differently here, not slower, but deeper. Moments from the past feel close, not because they are romanticized, but because they were never erased. Standing within these walls, it becomes clear that history is not only shaped by dramatic events, but by endurance, by families who chose continuity over reinvention, by spaces that adapted rather than disappeared. by belief maintained quietly, even when it brought danger rather than reward. After 850 years, the house does not claim perfection. It carries scars, compromises, and unanswered questions. But it also carries memory in its truest form, not as something preserved artificially, but as something lived, shared, and passed on. This is what sets England's oldest family homes apart. They are not monuments to wealth alone, but to persistence. To the idea that history is not something that ends, but something that requires care, generation after generation, to continue at all. As the house moves further into the modern era, its story becomes less about survival against open hostility and more about negotiation with time itself. The dangers are no longer soldiers or informants, but weather, decay, and changing expectations about what historic houses should be. By the late 20th century, the family faced a reality common to many old estates. Traditional sources of income had diminished. Agricultural rents no longer covered repairs. Social structures that once supported large households had vanished. Servants' quarters stood empty. Outbuildings needed new purpose or risked collapse. Yet, unlike houses that chose reinvention through drastic alteration, this one pursued continuity through adaptation. Rooms were reused rather than redesigned. Agricultural buildings were stabilized rather than demolished. New functions were introduced only where they could exist without erasing the past. This approach required restraint, patience, and a willingness to accept imperfection. Living in such a house demands a different relationship with comfort. Temperature fluctuates. Sound carries in unexpected ways. Walls cannot be insulated without consequence. Floors slope because they always have. These are not inconveniences to be corrected, but realities to be lived with. Over time, the family learned that preserving the house meant adapting themselves to it, rather than forcing it to conform to modern standards. This philosophy extends to how history is interpreted for visitors. Rather than presenting a single, curated moment, the house invites people to understand time as layered. A medieval doorway may lead into a Georgian room, which opens onto a Victorian corridor still used daily. Furniture from different centuries coexists, not because it was planned, but because that is how life unfolded. One of the most striking aspects of the house is how personal its history remains. This is not an abstract narrative told through plaques alone. Stories are tied to individuals whose names still belong to the same family living there now. Decisions made hundreds of years ago continue to shape daily life, from the layout of rooms to the rhythms of the week. Religious practice remains one of the clearest examples. While no longer persecuted, the family's faith still informs the use of space. The chapel is not a historical curiosity. It is active. Services continue. Rituals are observed. This continuity gives the house a spiritual dimension that many historic properties have lost. The library, too, continues to serve its original purpose. Though many books are now fragile, the room remains a place of study and reflection. Archives are consulted, not just admired. Family members learn their own history directly from original sources, fostering a sense of responsibility grounded in evidence rather than myth. The gardens provide a parallel narrative of continuity. Unlike interiors, which can be preserved through restraint, gardens require constant intervention. Left alone, they disappear. Their survival depends on ongoing care, knowledge, and labor. Over the past 50 years, the gardens have undergone one of the most significant transformations in the estate's history. When the family returned after wartime absence, the landscape was utilitarian and depleted. Ornamental planting had been replaced by necessity. Boundaries blurred. Structure was lost. Rebuilding the gardens required vision and endurance. Hedges were grown slowly from cuttings. Borders were laid out with long-term growth in mind. Trees were planted, knowing they would reach maturity long after the planter was gone. This is gardening on a generational scale. The decision to open the gardens to the public reinforced this philosophy. Visitors do not encounter a static display. They see growth, decline, experimentation, and renewal. Weather shapes the experience. Seasons dictate success and failure. The gardens, like the house, are alive. Volunteers now play a crucial role in this living system. Their presence reflects a broader shift in how historic places survive. Preservation is no longer the responsibility of a single family alone, but a shared effort. Knowledge is passed between professionals, amateurs, and enthusiasts, creating a community bound by care rather than ownership. Children running through the grounds add another layer to the story. Their laughter contrasts with the solemnity of the house's past, reminding visitors that history is not only about loss and endurance, but also about renewal. The estate is not preserved as a memorial. It functions as a place of life. This balance between past and present defines the house's modern identity. It is neither frozen nor transformed beyond recognition. Instead, it exists in dialogue with its own history, constantly negotiating what to keep, what to adapt, and what to let go. That negotiation is not always comfortable. Opening a private home to the public requires compromise. Privacy must be protected without creating distance. Wear and tear increases. Objects face greater risk. Yet the alternative, isolation, often leads to stagnation and decline. The family's decision to share their home reflects a belief that history gains meaning through access. A house that cannot be experienced cannot be understood. By inviting others inside, they allow the story to extend beyond bloodline and into collective memory. This approach also challenges assumptions about aristocracy and heritage. Rather than presenting wealth as spectacle, the house reveals the cost of continuity. Maintenance is constant. Resources are finite. Pride must coexist with humility. The past is honored, but not romanticized. Perhaps the most powerful lesson offered by this house is that history is not a straight line. It bends, retreats, and advances unevenly. Periods of stability are followed by uncertainty. Progress brings new challenges rather than resolution. The family's long presence here does not suggest inevitability. At many points, the house could have been lost. Confiscation, financial ruin, war, and neglect all threatened its existence. Its survival is not proof of destiny, but of repeated choice. Each generation faced its own version of the same question: how to carry this place forward without betraying what it is. There was no single answer. Solutions changed with circumstance. What remained constant was the commitment to continuity. In an age when permanence feels increasingly fragile, this house offers a different perspective on time. It reminds us that endurance is built slowly, through attention rather than ambition. That history is not preserved by grand gestures alone, but by daily care. As the house approaches 9 centuries of continuous occupation, its significance lies not just in age, but in example. It demonstrates that the past can remain present without dominating the future. That tradition can coexist with change. That memory, when actively maintained, becomes a resource rather than a burden. Standing at the threshold between ancient stone and modern life, the house continues its quiet work. It shelters, it teaches, it adapts. And in doing so, it carries forward a story that is still being written, not as a monument to what was, but as a living testament to what endures. What ultimately defines this house is not simply that it has survived, but that it has remained relevant without surrendering its identity. Many historic homes become echoes of themselves, preserved in a single moment, stripped of the complexity that once made them function. This one has resisted that fate by continuing to be lived in, argued over, adapted, and cared for. As the 21st century unfolds, the pressures facing the house are different again. Climate change brings heavier rain and unpredictable seasons, testing ancient drainage systems, and stonework never designed for modern extremes. Rising energy costs challenge buildings built long before insulation or central heating existed. Conservation regulations, while essential, demand careful planning and often slow decision-making. Nothing here can be rushed. Every repair becomes an ethical question. Should something be replaced, reinforced, or left imperfect but original? Is it better to hide modern interventions or allow them to be visible as part of the house's ongoing story? These are not academic debates. They affect daily life. A leaking roof cannot wait for philosophical clarity, yet the wrong solution could erase centuries of craftsmanship. The family's approach has been pragmatic, but deeply informed by history. They understand that earlier generations also faced similar dilemmas, even if the details were different. Medieval builders reused stone from older structures. Georgian renovators altered windows for light and taxation. Victorian owners modernized interiors. Change has always been part of survival. What distinguishes the present moment is awareness. The house is now recognized as nationally significant, not only because of its age, but because of its uninterrupted lineage. This recognition brings support, expertise, and scrutiny. Decisions are no longer private. They are part of a broader conversation about how a nation preserves its past. Yet for all this attention, the house remains first and foremost a home. Meals are cooked. Conversations echo through rooms layered with history. Celebrations take place beneath ceilings built by people whose names are long forgotten. Grief is felt in the same spaces where joy has accumulated over centuries. This continuity of human experience is what transforms the house from an object into a place. Visitors sense it immediately. There is an atmosphere of use rather than display. Chairs are positioned for comfort, not symmetry. Books show signs of handling. Gardens reflect the hand of the season rather than rigid design. Even the imperfections speak. Uneven steps remind visitors that the ground beneath has shifted over time. Variations in wall thickness reveal earlier phases of construction. Doorways align imperfectly because they were never meant to align at all. Each inconsistency is a clue. Education has become a central part of the house's modern role. School groups, historians, gardeners, and casual visitors all encounter history here not as a distant abstraction, but as something tangible. Children can stand where medieval families once stood. They can see how belief shaped architecture, how fear shaped design, and how resilience shaped outcome. This educational role extends beyond formal learning. Simply walking through the house challenges modern assumptions about progress. Comfort, privacy, and convenience were once luxuries rather than expectations. Space was used differently. Time moved according to light and season rather than schedules. In this way, the house becomes a quiet counterpoint to modern life. It invites reflection rather than spectacle. It asks visitors to slow down, to notice layers, to consider continuity rather than novelty. For many, this is unexpectedly powerful. The surrounding landscape reinforces this effect. The valley still holds a sense of enclosure and calm. Ancient trees stand where their predecessors once grew. The prehistoric stone circle remains, older than any wall, any family name, any nation. Its presence places everything else into perspective. Seen from this wider view, the house is not a singular miracle, but part of a much longer human relationship with place. People have chosen this valley again and again, adapting their lives to it, rather than forcing it to change completely. The family's story is simply the longest continuous chapter. As the next generation prepares to inherit responsibility, the questions remain familiar. How to maintain relevance without dilution? How to fund preservation without exploitation? How to live privately while serving a public role? There are no permanent answers, only ongoing effort. What offers reassurance is that these questions have always existed in some form. The house has weathered religious persecution, political upheaval, economic collapse, and social transformation. Each time, it adjusted just enough to endure. That endurance is not guaranteed. It depends on care, humility, and an understanding that ownership is temporary, even when it spans centuries. The family speaks openly about this. They do not see the house as something they possess, but as something entrusted to them. This perspective reshapes the meaning of heritage. It is not about freezing the past or glorifying lineage. It is about stewardship, about acknowledging that history survives not because it is old, but because someone chooses to look after it. In an age that often celebrates disruption, this house offers a quieter lesson. That continuity has value. That patience can be powerful. That preservation is an active, living process, not a passive one. After more than 850 years, the house still stands not as a monument to permanence, but as evidence of adaptation done carefully and with respect. Its walls hold memory, but they also shelter present life. Its future remains uncertain, as all futures do, but its past offers guidance. To step inside is to step into a conversation across centuries, one that continues not through grand declarations, but through everyday acts of care. And as long as that care continues, the story of England's oldest family home will remain unfinished, alive, and quietly unfolding. There is a quiet truth that emerges only after spending time within walls like these. Longevity does not come from resisting change outright, nor from embracing it recklessly. It comes from discernment, from knowing which elements must remain untouched and which must be allowed to evolve so that the whole may survive. For this house, that discernment has been learned slowly, passed down not as instruction, but as example. Children growing up here absorb it almost unconsciously. They learn early that a cracked stone step is not a flaw to be erased, but a record of passage. That a draft beneath a door is not simply discomfort, but a reminder of how the building breathes. That living in history means accommodating it, not dominating it. This mindset reshapes identity. The house is not something the family retreats into, but something they move with. Their lives are organized around its rhythms. Certain rooms are warmer in winter, others cooler in summer. Light enters differently throughout the day depending on the season. Silence is never complete. The building always speaks, settling, expanding, contracting. Over centuries, this intimacy between people and place has fostered a deep sense of continuity that transcends individual lifetimes. The family does not see themselves as the start or end of the story. They are a passage within it. This perspective tempers ego and expectation. Decisions are weighed not only against present convenience, but against future consequence. This is particularly evident in how the house engages with memory. Unlike institutions that rely on interpretation panels and labels, memory here is embedded. A worn threshold indicates where servants once moved unseen. A blocked doorway hints at former layouts now obsolete. A change in ceiling height signals a shift in era, purpose, or belief. Even absence tells a story. Rooms that no longer exist survive in uneven walls and inexplicable angles. Gardens that vanished during wartime linger in archival plans and family recollections. These gaps are not corrected. They are acknowledged. The archive itself plays a critical role in maintaining this honesty. Because records are preserved in such depth, there is little room for invention. Family myth is continually tested against documented reality. This fosters a relationship with the past that is grounded rather than sentimental. That grounding matters, especially in a culture increasingly fascinated by heritage as aesthetic. There is a temptation to smooth history into something consumable, to present the past as comforting rather than complex. This house resists that impulse. Its story includes discomfort, fear, compromise, and loss alongside beauty and endurance. Visitors often remark on this difference without being able to articulate it fully. They sense that the house is not performing history, but living with it. That what they are seeing has not been arranged solely for them, but exists independently of their gaze. This independence is what allows the house to retain dignity. It does not rely on novelty. Its power lies in accumulation. The weight of centuries is felt not through spectacle, but through presence. As modern life accelerates, this quality becomes increasingly rare. Time inside the house feels textured rather than compressed. Hours stretch differently. Attention sharpens. People notice details they might otherwise overlook. In this way, the house functions as a corrective to modern assumptions. It challenges the idea that newer is better, that efficiency is paramount, that progress must be visible. It suggests instead that value can lie in persistence, in care repeated over generations. This does not mean the house rejects innovation. Technology has been introduced where necessary. Conservation science informs restoration. Digital records complement physical archives. The family engages with experts, historians, architects, and craftspeople. But these tools serve continuity rather than replacement. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of the house's story is how little of it was inevitable. At many points, abandonment would have been easier. Selling, subdividing, or redeveloping would have made financial sense. Others did so, and their houses survive only in photographs or memory. What prevented that outcome here was not wealth alone, but attachment. A belief that this place mattered beyond its material value. That it carried something irreplaceable, not just for one family, but for the broader story of England. This belief was never absolute. Doubt existed. Fatigue set in. Responsibility weighed heavily at times, but the choice to continue was renewed again and again. As the house moves forward, it does so without certainty, but with experience. It has learned that survival does not require perfection. It requires attention, to notice when something is failing, to respond before collapse, to accept limits. In this sense, the house offers a model not just for preservation, but for living. It shows that continuity is not static. It is active. It demands presence. The future will bring challenges no previous generation faced. Environmental pressures will intensify. Social expectations will evolve. Economic realities will shift again. The house will have to adapt, just as it always has. What remains, constant, is the principle guiding those adaptations, that any change should deepen rather than dilute the connection between past and present, that the house should remain recognizable to those who came before, even as it serves those who live there now. This principle extends beyond architecture. It shapes how stories are told, how visitors are welcomed, how mistakes are acknowledged, how legacy is understood. Legacy here is not measured in monuments or fame. It is measured in continuity of use, in the fact that rooms remain rooms, not relics, that gardens continue to grow, that the chapel still holds meaning beyond its age. In a world where so much is temporary, this continuity carries quiet authority. It does not insist on admiration. It invites reflection. Standing at the edge of the valley, looking back toward the house partially hidden by trees and stone, one understands that its power lies precisely there, in its refusal to dominate the landscape, in its willingness to belong to it. After more than 8 centuries, the house remains not because it was protected from time, but because it learned how to live within it. That lesson, carried forward generation by generation, is its true inheritance. And as long as that understanding endures, the story of England's oldest family home will continue, not as a finished chapter, but as an ongoing conversation between past, present, and the people willing to listen. As the story stretches toward its 9th century, the house stands as a quiet witness to the accumulation of human intention. It is not the grandeur of any single moment that defines it, but the layering of countless ordinary days. Meals prepared and cleared, candles lit and extinguished, children learning where floorboards creak and where light gathers in the afternoon. These moments, repeated across generations, have shaped the house as surely as stone and timber. What becomes apparent is that the house has never existed in isolation from the people who lived within it. Its architecture responded to their needs, their fears, their beliefs, and their aspirations. When safety mattered most, walls thickened and windows shrank. When light and comfort became priorities, rooms opened and glass expanded. When privacy was essential, passages bent and spaces folded inward. The house is a map of human priorities over time. This adaptability explains why the house never became obsolete. It was never built for a single purpose or moment. From its earliest phase, it was intended to endure uncertainty. Medieval builders did not expect permanence in the modern sense, but they understood longevity. Materials were chosen for resilience. Repairs were assumed. Change was anticipated. Over time, this understanding became part of the family's inheritance. Each generation accepted that the house would demand something of them: attention, resources, time, emotional investment. Living here was not simply a privilege, but an obligation. This obligation shaped the way the family engaged with the outside world. Unlike families who used estates primarily as symbols of status, this one treated theirs as an anchor. Even when members pursued careers elsewhere, the house remained the reference point. It was where identity returned to rest. That sense of anchoring mattered during periods of national uncertainty. Civil conflict, religious division, industrial change, and social reform all passed through England, reshaping the country again and again. Through it all, the house remained a constant presence, not immune to impact, but resistant to erasure. The price of that resistance was often invisibility. While other families rose to prominence through public display, this one survived by staying just out of view. Their house was hidden in a valley. Their influence exercised quietly. Their beliefs practiced discreetly when necessary. This strategy of survival through discretion left its mark on the house itself. Spaces designed to conceal, to protect, to observe without being seen, remain embedded in the structure. Priest holes, diverted chimneys, and secondary staircases are physical reminders of a time when architecture had to serve secrecy. These features are no longer required, but they are not erased. They remain as evidence of how seriously the family took the idea that belief and place were worth defending. Visitors who encounter these spaces often pause longer here than anywhere else, sensing that the house once held danger as well as comfort. As the centuries passed and those dangers receded, the house gradually opened itself. Rooms became more generous, decorations softened, art entered the spaces not as propaganda, but as personal expression. Collections grew not through conquest or display, but through curiosity and connection. The presence of foreign influences within the house tells another story of adaptation. Objects from Italy, France, and later America found a home here, not because the family sought novelty, but because their lives extended beyond England. Marriage, travel, and intellectual exchange brought the wider world into the valley. These objects were not arranged to impress. They were absorbed. A Venetian chair beside an English hearth, French wallpaper lining medieval walls, American glassware sitting comfortably on a dining table, shaped by centuries of use. Each item adds to the sense that the house is not frozen in national identity, but open to dialogue. That openness is reflected in how the family speaks about the future. There is no illusion that the house will always remain exactly as it is. They acknowledge that every generation will leave a different mark, just as those before them did. What matters is not preservation of appearance, but preservation of intention. Intention, in this context, means care. It means understanding why something exists before deciding what to do with it. It means respecting the logic of the house rather than imposing a new one. It means recognizing that some problems have no perfect solution, only thoughtful compromise. This philosophy becomes especially important when addressing modern expectations. Visitors arrive with assumptions shaped by films, literature, and idealized visions of the past. They expect symmetry, polish, and coherence. What they encounter instead is complexity. The house does not offer a single narrative. It offers many, sometimes contradictory. Moments of courage sit alongside moments of caution. Periods of prosperity coexist with long stretches of restraint. The family's story resists simplification. This refusal to simplify is one of the house's greatest strengths. It allows visitors to engage with history honestly, to see that survival was not heroic at every moment, but persistent. That continuity was achieved not through triumph, but through endurance. The house also challenges the notion that heritage belongs only to the past. By remaining inhabited, it asserts that history continues, that the present is not separate from what came before, but shaped by it. Children growing up here today are not reenacting history. They are adding to it. Their experience will be different. The threats they face are less visible, but no less real. Climate instability, economic pressure, and shifting cultural values will test the house in new ways. How it responds will determine whether its story continues uninterrupted. What gives confidence is the pattern established across centuries. The house has always responded by adjusting rather than abandoning, by accepting help rather than retreating, by opening its doors when necessary and closing them when required. This balance between openness and protection has defined its character. It is neither fortress nor museum. It is a home that understands its vulnerability and acts accordingly. The surrounding landscape reinforces this understanding. The valley still shelters the house as it always has. Trees planted generations ago now provide shade and structure. Paths worn by repeated use guide movement naturally rather than forcefully. The land has not been conquered, but partnered with. The prehistoric stone circle nearby remains the oldest presence of all. It reminds those who live here that the house itself is only one chapter in a much longer human story, that people have been drawn to this place for reasons that predate architecture, faith, and lineage. This awareness tempers ambition. It encourages humility. The house exists not as a claim over the land, but as part of a continuum of occupation, use, and meaning. In this sense, the house is less about ownership than about relationship, a relationship between people and place that must be renewed daily. That demands listening as much as action, that accepts limits. As the story reaches this point, what remains most striking is how quietly it has unfolded. There are no dramatic declarations carved into stone, no moments of singular transformation. Instead, there is accumulation, layer upon layer of lived experience. This quietness is its strength. It allows the house to endure without demanding attention, to persist without spectacle, to hold meaning without insisting upon it. After more than 850 years, the house stands as evidence that history does not need to be loud to be powerful. That continuity is not the absence of change, but the careful negotiation of it. And that some of the most enduring stories are those lived steadily, generation after generation, within walls that remember but do not cling. As the house carries its story forward, what becomes increasingly evident is that longevity reshapes how time is understood. Here, time is not something that rushes forward in pursuit of novelty. It settles, it layers, it accumulates meaning through repetition. The house does not measure its life in decades or even centuries, but in continuity of use. That continuity changes how memory operates. Events that would seem distant elsewhere feel close here, not because they are constantly retold, but because their consequences remain visible. A decision made 400 years ago still affects how a room is used today. A wall built to hide worship still shapes circulation. A garden laid out for pleasure centuries ago still dictates how light moves across the land. Living with this kind of memory requires emotional balance. There is pride, certainly, but also restraint. The family does not live as characters inside a story. They live ordinary lives shaped by an extraordinary setting. Laundry must be done, repairs scheduled, children sent to school. The past does not excuse the present from responsibility. In fact, the past intensifies that responsibility. Knowing how easily the house could have been lost fosters vigilance. The family understands that survival has never been guaranteed. Each generation has come close to breaking the chain, sometimes through forces beyond their control, sometimes through simple exhaustion. It is tempting to imagine that continuity creates certainty, but here it creates awareness. Awareness that permanence is fragile, that endurance must be earned repeatedly, that inheritance is not a gift received once, but a task renewed daily. This awareness influences how the house engages with the wider world. Rather than withdrawing into exclusivity, it has chosen connection. Education programs, open days, events, and shared stewardship are not merely financial strategies. They are philosophical ones. They recognize that places endure best when they are valued by more than those who live within them. This shift toward shared value reflects a broader change in how historic houses function in modern society. Once symbols of separation, they are now increasingly sites of encounter, between past and present, between private memory and public understanding, between tradition and change. The house's long experience navigating these boundaries gives it an advantage. It has always existed at an intersection, between faiths during the Reformation, between social classes as domestic life evolved, between nations through marriage and migration. It understands that boundaries are porous. This understanding shapes how stories are told here. There is no attempt to sanitize difficulty or exaggerate heroism. The narrative acknowledges compromise as much as conviction, fear alongside courage, survival alongside loss. This honesty resonates with visitors. Many arrive expecting romance and leave with something more complex. They encounter history that feels human rather than monumental, decisions made under pressure, lives shaped by circumstance rather than destiny. One of the most powerful aspects of this experience is its ordinariness. The house was never designed to be extraordinary. It became so through persistence, through being used, adapted, and inhabited without interruption. This ordinariness makes its longevity all the more remarkable. In a culture that often equates value with scale or spectacle, the house offers a different measure. Its significance lies not in size or ornament, but in continuity of relationship, between people and place, between memory and use. This relationship is sustained through daily acts that rarely draw attention. Locks checked, windows repaired, paths cleared, borders replanted. None of these acts are dramatic, but together they form the foundation of endurance. The family speaks often of listening to the house. This is not metaphorical. Sounds, smells, and changes in atmosphere provide information. A new draft suggests movement. A shift in moisture signals drainage issues. The building communicates through subtle cues, learned over time. This attentiveness cannot be taught quickly. It develops through immersion, through living within the house long enough to notice its patterns. This is another reason continuity matters. Knowledge accumulates not only in archives, but in bodies, in memory, in instinct. The next generation grows into this knowledge gradually. They learn what previous generations learned, but in a different context. Their challenges will not mirror those of the past, but the skill of adaptation remains transferable. What they inherit is not certainty, but precedent. The understanding that change is inevitable, but not arbitrary. That decisions should be informed by history, rather than detached from it. That stewardship is an ongoing conversation, rather than a fixed rulebook. This perspective contrasts sharply with how many historic places are managed today. Too often, preservation becomes rigid, freezing a place at a chosen moment. While this protects appearance, it can disconnect function. The house avoids this by allowing itself to continue changing within limits. Those limits are guided by respect rather than nostalgia. Respect for craftsmanship, for intention, for the lives that unfolded here. This respect does not prohibit new use, but it insists that new use be thoughtful. This is particularly visible in how the house balances access and intimacy. Certain spaces remain private, not out of secrecy, but necessity. A home requires refuge. Without it, continuity would falter. The house understands this balance because it has lived it for centuries. Visitors sense this immediately. There is a boundary that is felt rather than enforced, a recognition that what is shared is offered, not taken. This fosters trust, which in turn deepens engagement. Trust also extends to interpretation. The house does not dictate what visitors should feel. It presents evidence, space, and story, allowing individuals to draw their own connections. This openness reflects confidence in the house's narrative. It does not need embellishment. Over time, the house has become a reference point not just for visitors, but for scholars, conservationists, and those interested in long-term stewardship. Its survival offers insight into how built environments can adapt without erasing identity. This insight is increasingly valuable as societies grapple with sustainability. The house demonstrates that reuse, repair, and adaptation are not modern inventions, but long-standing practices. That sustainability is as much cultural as technical. In this sense, the house is unexpectedly modern. Its reliance on incremental change, local materials, and deep knowledge of place aligns with contemporary values. What appears old-fashioned is, in fact, forward-looking. The prehistoric stone circle nearby reinforces this perspective. It reminds those who live and visit here that human presence has always been temporary in comparison to the land. That structures come and go, but relationships with place endure. The house's greatest achievement may be its humility in the face of this truth. It does not claim permanence. It claims care. It accepts that one day it may change beyond recognition, but works to delay that outcome responsibly. This acceptance frees the house from anxiety about legacy. The goal is not immortality, but continuity for as long as possible. Each generation extends the story a little further, knowing it may not be the last. As the house continues into its next chapter, it does so with awareness rather than certainty. It carries the accumulated wisdom of centuries, but remains open to learning. It knows that survival depends not on rigid adherence to the past, but on respectful dialogue with it. In the end, what makes England's oldest family home extraordinary is not simply that it has lasted so long. It is that it has remained attentive to its environment, to its history, to the people who live within it, and those who come seeking understanding. That attentiveness, practiced quietly day after day, generation after generation, is the true foundation of its endurance. As the house moves further into the present, the meaning of inheritance becomes increasingly nuanced. In earlier centuries, inheritance was defined by land, title, and obligation. Today, it is equally defined by responsibility, interpretation, and restraint. The family understands that what they pass on is not simply a building, but a way of thinking about time. This way of thinking is shaped by repetition. Daily routines unfold within spaces formed long before electricity, plumbing, or modern convenience. Each action reinforces an awareness of continuity, turning a handle shaped by countless hands, walking a path worn smooth by generations, looking out through windows positioned according to needs no longer immediate, but still felt. These small experiences accumulate into a worldview that values patience. When something breaks, it is repaired rather than replaced. When something fades, it is documented rather than erased. The house encourages this mindset because it resists quick solutions. Nothing here can be done hastily without consequence. This resistance to speed influences how the family approaches decision-making. Long-term thinking becomes instinctive. Choices are evaluated not only for immediate benefit, but for how they will age. Materials are selected for durability rather than appearance. Interventions are reversible where possible. The aim is always to preserve flexibility for future generations. This flexibility is essential because each generation arrives with different pressures. Economic realities shift, social expectations change, technologies emerge that alter how people live and work. The house must accommodate these shifts without losing coherence. One of the most challenging aspects of this accommodation is reconciling modern standards with historic fabric. Accessibility, safety, and sustainability all demand attention. Yet implementing them within an ancient structure requires creativity and compromise. Solutions are rarely perfect. They are negotiated. A handrail added where none existed. Lighting introduced subtly rather than prominently. Heating managed through zoning rather than overhaul. Each solution reflects the same guiding principle: intervene only as much as necessary and no more. This principle extends to interpretation. The house does not attempt to explain every detail exhaustively. Instead, it trusts visitors to observe, to ask questions, to draw connections. The experience is intentionally incomplete. It invites curiosity rather than providing closure. Curiosity, after all, is what sustains relevance. A house that answers every question risks becoming static. One that provokes inquiry remains alive. Visitors leave not with a finished understanding, but with an ongoing relationship to the place. This openness also allows the house to absorb new stories. Modern events, personal milestones, and shared experiences layer themselves onto the existing narrative. Weddings, celebrations, quiet moments of reflection all take place within rooms shaped by centuries of memory. These contemporary layers are not treated as intrusions. They are recognized as the continuation of a pattern. The house has always been shaped by the lives lived within it. To stop that process would be to sever continuity. The gardens reflect this same philosophy. They are not preserved as a snapshot of a particular era, but allowed to evolve. Planting schemes change, borders are reimagined, trees are lost and replaced. The structure remains, but the expression shifts. This acceptance of change within structure mirrors the house itself. It acknowledges that stability does not require sameness. It requires coherence, a sense that new elements belong, even as they differ. Belonging is a recurring theme here. The house belongs to the valley. The family belongs to the house. Visitors temporarily belong to the experience. This layered belonging creates resilience. it spreads care across a wider network. When people feel connected to a place, they advocate for it. They return. They volunteer. They remember. This shared investment strengthens the house's future in ways private ownership alone cannot. Yet even with this support, uncertainty remains. No amount of care can guarantee permanence. The family accepts this without fatalism. They understand that their role is not to control outcomes, but to extend possibility. This acceptance frees them from the pressure of legacy as performance. They are not trying to be remembered as perfect stewards. They are trying to be attentive ones. To leave the house slightly better understood, slightly more stable, slightly more prepared for what comes next. Understanding is perhaps the most important gift they pass on. Through archives, stories, and lived experience, they ensure that future custodians know why things are the way they are. Knowledge prevents well-intentioned damage. It provides context for difficult choices. This emphasis on understanding also shapes how the house engages with history more broadly. It does not isolate its story from national or global narratives. Instead, it situates itself within them. Religious conflict, political reform, industrial change, and global exchange all left traces here. By acknowledging these connections, the house avoids insularity. It becomes a lens through which larger histories can be examined at a human scale. Visitors see how abstract events affected real lives, real spaces, real decisions. This human scale is what makes the house enduringly relevant. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by leaders and battles, but by families navigating uncertainty, by choices made quietly, often under pressure, with limited information. The house stands as a record of those choices, not always heroic, not always successful, but persistent. As time continues, the house's greatest challenge may be maintaining this balance between openness and protection. As interest grows, so does pressure. More visitors, more events, more expectations. Each must be weighed carefully. The family is keenly aware that popularity can be as dangerous as neglect. Overuse erodes fabric. Excessive interpretation flattens meaning. Commercialization risks distorting purpose. Guarding against these risks requires restraint. Restraint, once again, is learned from history. The house survived because it was not always at the center of attention. It thrived in relative quiet. That quiet allowed it to adapt without scrutiny, to repair without performance. Preserving a measure of that quiet remains essential. It protects not only the house, but the experience it offers. Visitors sense this calm and respond to it. They slow down. They listen. They notice. In this way, the house influences behavior as much as it reflects history. It encourages a different pace, a different way of seeing, a recognition that some things cannot be rushed without loss. This influence extends beyond the visit itself. People carry it with them. They leave thinking differently about buildings, about inheritance, about care. The house becomes a reference point for patience in a world often defined by speed. This may be its most unexpected legacy, not simply preserving the past, but shaping the present by offering an alternative model of continuity. One grounded in attention rather than ambition, in relationship rather than ownership. As the house approaches its 9th century, it does so quietly, without announcement. There are no milestones carved into stone, no proclamations of endurance, just continued use. The rooms remain lived in. The gardens remain tended. The chapel remains active. The archive remains consulted. The valley remains sheltering. And within this continuity, the house continues to do what it has always done. It holds memory without clinging to it. It adapts without losing itself. It survives not by standing apart from time, but by moving carefully within it. This is the essence of its story. Not a tale of unchanging preservation, but of thoughtful persistence, of a place that understands that to last, it must remain both grounded and responsive. In that understanding lies the true inheritance passed from generation to generation, a way of living with history that honors it without being constrained by it. And as long as that understanding endures, the story of this house will continue, quietly unfolding into whatever comes next. As the centuries continue to stack upon one another, the house increasingly reveals itself not as a static object, but as a process. It is the product of ongoing negotiation between human intention and natural limitation. Stone weathers, timber moves, roof lines shift almost imperceptibly. The building is never finished, only managed. This understanding alters how longevity is perceived. Longevity here is not about resisting entropy entirely, but about slowing it through attentiveness. It is about accepting that decay will occur, but refusing to allow it to become abandonment. The house has survived precisely because it has never been ignored for long. Every generation learns this lesson early. Small signs matter. A hairline crack, a damp patch, a door that suddenly sticks. These are not inconveniences, but messages. Left unaddressed, they compound. Addressed early, they become manageable. The house teaches vigilance through experience. That vigilance becomes a form of intimacy. The family knows the building not through blueprints alone, but through touch and habit. They know which windows rattle in certain winds, which rooms warm first in spring, which corners hold frost longest in winter. This knowledge cannot be outsourced. It is acquired by living there. This lived knowledge is one of the most fragile aspects of heritage. When a house passes out of continuous occupation, much of it is lost. Maintenance becomes reactive rather than responsive. Decisions are made based on theory rather than familiarity. The house may remain standing, but its internal logic begins to fade. Here, that logic remains intact because it has never been interrupted. Even when the family was forced away, temporarily, memory returned with them. They remembered how the house functioned when fully alive. Restoration was guided by recollection as much as record. This continuity also shapes emotional relationships with the past. Ancestors are not abstract figures. They are felt presences, not in a mystical sense, but through consequence. Their decisions remain visible. Their compromises still shape daily life. This closeness prevents idealization. The family knows their predecessors were neither flawless nor uniformly wise. Some decisions caused long-term difficulty. Others required later correction. The house bears witness to all of it. This honest relationship with ancestry fosters humility. The family does not imagine themselves as exceptional, only as participants in a long chain. Their task is not to surpass those who came before, but to avoid breaking what was passed to them. This perspective is increasingly rare in a culture that prizes individual achievement. Here, value is measured by continuity rather than distinction, by what endures rather than what dazzles. That does not mean individuality is suppressed. Each generation expresses itself within the constraints of the house. Personal taste appears in subtle ways. A chosen color, a piece of furniture, a planted border. These expressions add texture without overwhelming structure. Over time, these small additions become part of the house's character. They accumulate gently, enriching rather than replacing what came before. This method of change stands in contrast to periods of rapid transformation elsewhere, where buildings are routinely stripped and reinvented. The house's resistance to reinvention has preserved not only fabric, but memory. Layers remain legible. One can read the building like a document, tracing shifts in belief, technology, and lifestyle through its form. The chapel remains one of the clearest examples. Its location, orientation, and continued use reveal centuries of religious continuity despite political rupture. Even its renovations speak volumes. Gothic revival elements layered onto medieval structure reflect changing aesthetics without altering purpose. That purpose has always been central. Faith here was never ornamental. It shaped behavior, risk, and architecture. The house protected worship when worship was dangerous. That fact remains embedded in its walls. When visitors encounter this story, many are struck by how physical belief once was, how it shaped where walls were built and how chimneys were diverted, how architecture became an act of conviction. This challenges modern assumptions about belief as abstract or private. Here, belief demanded space, secrecy, and sacrifice. It left tangible marks. The house contains many such marks, each tied to necessity rather than display. Hidden staircases, secondary corridors, and irregular ceiling voids all exist for reasons that once mattered deeply. Their survival offers insight into how people navigated fear with ingenuity. As fear receded, these features lost urgency, but not relevance. They became reminders of resilience rather than tools of survival. Their presence keeps memory honest. Memory, however, is not preserved through architecture alone. It requires storytelling. The family understands this. Stories are passed down alongside documents. Context accompanies fact. This oral continuity prevents misunderstanding. Without it, features risk becoming curiosities divorced from meaning. With it, they remain connected to lived experience. The house also benefits from written continuity. The archive serves as an anchor, grounding memory in evidence. This balance between story and record strengthens understanding. Neither dominates, each corrects the other. Understanding, in turn, informs care. When repairs are undertaken, they are guided by knowledge of why something exists, not just how it looks. This prevents well-intentioned but destructive interventions. Modern conservation increasingly recognizes the importance of this approach. Buildings are not just materials, but systems shaped by use. Preserving them requires understanding behavior as much as fabric. The house exemplifies this principle. Its survival offers lessons for broader heritage practice. That conservation is not simply about freezing form, but sustaining function. Function here includes domestic life. The house remains a place where people live, not merely observe. This distinction preserves authenticity. Visitors encounter a house that smells, sounds, and feels lived in. This sensory dimension is difficult to replicate in preserved environments. It arises only through continuous occupation. The presence of daily life prevents the house from becoming abstract. Abstraction is the enemy of empathy. When history becomes distant, it loses power. Here, proximity restores it. Visitors imagine not only what happened, but how it felt. This emotional engagement is one of the house's greatest contributions. It bridges time without flattening complexity. It invites reflection rather than nostalgia. The house does not ask to be admired uncritically. It invites contemplation. It suggests that survival required compromise as much as courage. That endurance often depended on restraint rather than defiance. These lessons resonate beyond heritage. They speak to how individuals and societies navigate change. They suggest that persistence is not passive. It is active, attentive, and often quiet. As the house continues, its greatest risk may not be physical decay, but misunderstanding. If its story were reduced to a single narrative, much would be lost. Its richness lies in multiplicity. The family is conscious of this. They resist oversimplification. They allow ambiguity. They acknowledge uncertainty. Where records end, they say so. Where motives are unclear, they do not speculate recklessly. This intellectual honesty reinforces trust. Visitors sense that they are encountering history responsibly, not theatrically. This trust deepens engagement. The house also demonstrates that preservation is not about retreating into the past. It is about engaging with it thoughtfully. Modern concerns are addressed without apology. Sustainability is prioritized, access is considered, education is expanded. These efforts ensure relevance. A house that exists only for those who already value history risks isolation. This one reaches outward, inviting participation. Participation, however, does not mean dilution. The core values remain intact. Continuity, care, humility, and attentiveness guide decisions. As the years advance, the house will inevitably change, materials will age, functions will shift, new challenges will arise. What matters is not preventing change, but guiding it. This guidance is informed by long memory, by patterns observed across centuries, by understanding that drastic change rarely ensures survival, but measured adaptation often does. The house has survived because it learned this lesson early and applied it consistently. Each generation inherited not certainty, but a method. Observe, understand, act carefully, repeat. That method is now its most valuable legacy. More enduring than stone, more transferable than land. As long as that method is practiced, the house will continue to negotiate time rather than be overtaken by it. It will remain neither relic nor reinvention, but something rarer. A place where history is not preserved as an object, but lived as a responsibility. Where the past informs the present without imprisoning it. Where endurance is achieved not through resistance alone, but through thoughtful participation in change. And so the story continues, not with a conclusion, but with continuity. The house remains, attentive and alive, extending its long conversation with time, one careful decision at a time.